especially delighted to be able to introduce our colleague Bonita London, who of course is Professor of Psychology and Associate Dean in the College of Arts and Sciences for Research Development and Communications. So Dr. Bonita London joined the faculty at Stony Brook in 2006 after receiving her PhD in psychology from Columbia University. Dr. London's research addresses the psychosocial and institutional mechanisms that define educational achievement. And also she thinks about psychological well-being and career advancement of scholars across the workforce. Her research uses experimental, longitudinal, and survey methods of study to look at how, when, and why students experience challenges and threats to identity, to academic and social belonging, and what interpersonal and environmental messages contribute to threat versus belonging, how students also cope with perceived threat, and what the implications are for students' academic, career, and life outcomes. Throughout her career at Stony Brook, Dr. London's research has been continuously funded by multiple research grants from the National Science Foundation. She's also received numerous fellowships and other types of grants. We would be here far longer than you would want to be if I listed all of them, but she's very impressive. She has served as the director of the master's program in the psychology department and also area director for the social and health psychology PhD program. So she understands many of the things that those of you on the call do on a daily basis to help look after our graduate students. Dr. London has been the recipient of the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Faculty Excellence, as well as the Stony Brook College of Arts and Sciences Faculty Award for Outreach, and finally, the Suffolk County Martin Luther King Jr. Commission Award. One of the delights of working with Bonita, who I've come to know in my role in the graduate school, is how grounded and committed she is to Stony Brook while having such a distinguished national reputation. I have submitted grants with Bonita, and reviewers routinely call out her name as a sign of rigorous, valuable, and impactful work. It really is amazing and humbling to see those reviewers, all recognize the contributions that she has made. I have met colleagues at conferences as well, and when I mention her name, everyone comments on our good luck in having her at Stony Brook University. So I'm very proud to have her as a colleague and so very pleased that she has agreed to share some of her work with us today. So thank you, Bonita. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Celia, and thank you to everyone for coming and just having this conversation. I think this is really hopefully a conversation, so we'll get to talking about some of the issues as I go through some of the work. I will say one of the things that I'm planning to talk about is imposterism, and Celia, you just exploded all of my imposterism fears. So we'll see how this goes. I'm going to try to share my screen now. And here we go. Okay, hopefully you all are seeing my screen. Great, awesome. So before I start, I just want to say a quick thank you to so many of the collaborators and the funding that has supported this work across my time at Stony Brook. I'm sure I've probably missed some great collaborators that I've worked with over the years, but it's been an incredible group of people who have thought really deeply about understanding what and how students navigate their undergraduate and graduate experiences. So this has been an incredible amount of work and a labor of love, I think, for many of us. So really appreciate all of the work that my graduate students and collaborators have done over time. So I did a little bit of digging in the website, the graduate school website, and I found the graduate school's mission statement and was super relieved to recognize that we're all sort of in it together. So the graduate school's mission includes empowering a diverse community involved in graduate education through professional and personal development, innovative curriculum, and supporting students and postdocs as they pursue creative academic and research opportunities. So despite, where we all are who are on this call, whether we are working with students in our scholarly research, or we're working with students as advisors and mentors, as staff, as recruiting and outreach professionals in many different ways. I think we're all in the same mission of thinking about how do we enhance and promote and support the students that we're encountering each day in the university. And that's what's that idea, I guess, has really guided the work that I've been doing in my lab and over some time. So what I hope to do, I've got like 30 minutes and I could go on and on, but I wanted to just give a couple of snapshots of the kind of work and the topics that we think about in my lab as a social psychologist, and the perspective, I guess, that we take on trying to understand educational success among students. So this is really kind of a bunch of different snapshots of topics and concepts and theories that I think really matter and that we continue to study in terms of education, and hopefully having a lot of discussion around other areas that you think might be relevant or might be connected to some of the work that we've been doing. So I'm a social psychologist, and part of what that means for me is trying to think about when I'm studying student success, and I'm trying to think about all of the different ways and pathways that might impact whether or not and how a student becomes successful in a given field. And so part of what I want to share is a little bit of an organizing framework for thinking about that. To think about, like, how are students successful? What are the factors that promote success? How are institutions contributing to that success in a way? My lab has really drawn on developmental psych research, particularly a model by Jackie Eccles. Jackie Eccles studied developmental children at different developmental stages, particularly focusing on the transition from elementary school to middle school. And what Jackie Eccles' stage environment fit model theorized is that if we want to understand how and why students are successful, we have to think about what students' needs are. Where are they in a developmental sort of time frame? What do they want to accomplish, and how are they sort of, again, developmentally prepared for certain situations and environments? And then we need to think about, what are schools providing? Are they meeting those needs? Are they missing those needs? Are they creating an environment that doesn't fit and match, what a student may need at a given time point? So Jackie Eccles' work really focused on that from a K through 12 perspective. I'm going to share just kind of my anecdotal thoughts about what that kind of model and approach might look like if we were to think about it in graduate school, right? So the same things. What do our graduate students need? Thinking about where they are developmentally. What do they need for their both academic and professional development, as well as their personal development? And then what do our graduate training programs typically look like? So this is not an indictment of any grad department or, our grad school in general. It's just saying, are we matched and are we meeting the needs that our students are communicating and expressing? So again, if we were together in a room, we might do this as a little activity where we think about what our students need, but this is just my quick and sort of dirty assessment of that. So one thing our students need is a sense of competence and efficacy. Efficacy being confidence that you can do whatever tasks are necessary in your field of study. And competence feeling a sense of accomplishment and knowledge and growth in that space. That, I think, we could probably clearly agree that our students probably need as they enter and go through their graduate training. But I think some or many graduate training environments often create a situation where scholars are being challenged on their competence. They're being or they're operating in a system where there's more of a value on natural ability, fast, quick work that reflects sort of innate talent. And that, what we know from the literature, doesn't really fit the need for developing scholars to feel a sense of growth and development as they go through their academic journey. So what those spaces and the environments look like and what they value may not be what students need as they're entering graduate training. Another area that I think is we probably would agree on is the idea that students probably need scholarly independence as they're going through graduate training, right? We want to develop the next generation of scholars in a particular field, but a lot of graduate programs and undergraduate programs adopt a more directive mentoring process where it's not quite collaborative. It's more didactic, where I'm the scholar and I'm teaching you some knowledge, and there's not a lot of independence, maybe until they get to dissertation phase. And so again, we're not necessarily meeting the needs of students where they are in their graduate training. And so we want to talk about that. Another area that our lab has worked on quite a bit is this idea of career identification. Like, I feel like I am a psychologist, right? I'm a social psychologist. I identify with that career. I invest in that career. And so that gives me a sense of confidence and pride that's connected to that discipline. But we all know that our graduate students are dealing with a landscape where, you know, they may be training in a particular area, but what their career actually is may not be in that area, whether it's the lack of academic positions or, you know, really trying to figure out how to translate their training to a different field. It's a challenge to really identify with a particular type of career or space when you don't quite know what the future of your career might be. Another important area that students need is belonging and networking. I mean, I feel like this kind of goes, you know, without a lot of detail. Students are entering their graduate education at a time where they may be coming to a new institution, a new space, a new state, a new country. And so developing a sense of belonging and networking and connection is really critical. Whereas some of our graduate training programs may really foster isolated training where folks are in the lab focusing on their one topic or working just one-on-one with one advisor, dealing with archives, let's say, that again may not be a space where they're integrated and developing a sense of network. And then finally, this is slightly outside of the sort of professional space, but like work-life balance. These are human beings who, you know, are in a developmental phase themselves, that they may be thinking about their broader life goals, when the timing of graduate training is often a high pressure workload, where there may not be a lot of work-life balance. So I put these all up to say, one way of thinking about navigating the graduate academic landscape is to kind of stop and think, what are our scholars needing developmentally and professionally and personally? And how do our graduate training programs and environments either do or do not meet those needs? And according to the work of Eccles, when there's that disconnect, we often see people not persisting, disengaging, not being as successful as we would want them to be in those spaces. So another way to think about, you know, how do we study academic success is to figure out, you know, what different scholars think success means, or how do they get there? How do they persist in challenging spaces when they're pursuing their graduate education? A couple years ago, I think in 2012, this article was published in Scientific American, where the authors worked with an education researcher, and they asked scientists, so this is not a broad sample of scholars, but asked scientists to think back over their experience in middle school and high school and college, and think about, like, what was the one or two factors that really motivated them to persist in their field. And I like looking at this because, again, as someone who's studying what makes people successful, I get some clear examples here of what students and scholars think matters to them most. What I notice from this graph is that different factors matter at different developmental times, right? So while something like good grades was really important in middle school, by the time you get to college, it's something else that might matter most for how students persist. I also think about things like passion for the field. We can't, maybe we can, but it's difficult, I think, to instill passion in someone, but it's probably pretty easy to like break someone from having passion in that space, right? So it's not only what can we work on to try to motivate, but what do we also have to protect for people in terms of promoting persistence? So these sets of factors, in my mind, are important for us to think about because, again, they're people telling us what's motivating, what drives you in terms of success. And if we can create those factors in our educational spaces, then we're sort of, matching the needs that scholars may have. So that's positive stuff. In my lab, we generally think about, again, academic success in a broad way. But we also are very interested in how members of certain groups, students from historically underrepresented groups, might actually experience the academic spaces in higher ed in very different and unique ways than their broader peers. And so we also focus on the challenges that students from historically marginalized groups tend to report about academic success. So what are some of the inhibiting factors, I would say, that undermine academic success for students? If you look across the literature and kind of summarize the stories and the data that you see across that literature, what we find is that students from underrepresented groups often say that academia and higher ed is often a chilly space, unsupportive, where they don't have mentoring relationships with teachers and faculty that we know from the broader literature is important for students' success and persistence, where they have less access to resources and career social networks, where the stereotypes about their competence or lack of competence in different fields really impacts their ability to engage and to be successful in those fields. And where their representation is not as reflective in these different institutions. So if we kind of take all of this general knowledge together and think about what are some motivating things that push students or motivate students to be successful, what are the barriers that are often standing in the way of some students, that's the kind of work that my lab has really been interested in doing over a couple of years. So this is, our general research goal is to try to explore the impact of, and I kind of categorize these different factors as individual level factors, social factors, and programmatic and institutional factors that all contribute to success outcomes in students. And we've done work across many different projects and many different data sets and many different grants, some focusing on K through 12 students, because, again, thinking developmentally, students in K through 12 may need very different things and be motivated by very different things than students who are in graduate school. So we've kind of looked across the developmental time frame or lifespan to think about, what promotes success at these different phases and stages. So as I said, we could go crazy, I'm sure, if we opened up a discussion and talked about, like, what do you think matters? What do you think matters? What have you experienced? What are the stories that you've heard from different students? So And we do in my lab certainly go crazy. If you were to look at our surveys, and I think Carrie Ann is on here, so Carrie Ann knows the length of our surveys. Sometimes it's because there's so many things that matter and that we found are really important in predicting success that we want to kind of understand and study them all in different ways. But if we try to be a little bit structured in how we do things, I could kind of organize them in two individual level factors. So a couple of topics and concepts that we've studied that we know predicts things like thinking about dropping out of your field of study or persistence or belonging. So concepts like imposterism, achievement beliefs, career identity and career efficacy, those are all factors that, from my perspective, are sort of within the individual. So beliefs that you may have and adopt over time of different experiences that guide and help you navigate or not navigate the academic spaces that you're in. Social factors like social support, mentoring, peer belonging. I'm a social psychologist, so I've got to think about how are relationships impacting, whether or not you feel engaged and connected and successful. And then institutional factors. We've kind of moved a little bit, and we're not far away from this, but we moved a little bit from research that talked about really blatant forms of discrimination or blatant messages that instructors and teachers would give to students that undermine their success. And now we're into a little bit more subtle messages where it's not someone telling you that you don't belong, but it's all about the environment and what kinds of messages may be coming from the actions and the activities of people around you. So we're interested in studying those kinds of institutional and cultural messages that students can encounter. Okay, so I just want to give a couple of quick examples of each of these levels. And again, I'd love for us to have a conversation about this. Thinking about the individual level, I've studied quite a bit of this idea that we all develop competence beliefs. We all have what we call a lay theory, a theory that we've come up with just from our own experiences about how success works, right? So as a child, we may, do poorly on a test. And when we do poorly on a test, we try to figure out what happened. Am I not smart enough? Did I not study well enough? Are my parents telling me some different way to, engage my work? Do I feel like I'm not empowered to be successful? And we construct what we call a lay theory about success. Carol Dweck, who's one of my graduate advisors in grad school, studied this idea that these theories motivate us to cope in particular ways with challenges and setbacks that we experienced. So one theory that people can come up with is that intelligence is fixed. You're born with a certain amount of it. You can't change it. It's just what you have. Your success is about whatever that innate natural ability is, and that's it, right? So that's a fixed intelligence belief. Some people develop what's called a growth mindset, this idea that your intelligence and your success grows as a function of you challenging yourself, you trying new things, persisting in the face of failure, figuring out how to shift and change your approach to something when the first way that you did it doesn't work. And this idea is that, again, these beliefs are sort of something that we come to adopt. And based on this work, Carol Dweck and others have explored how the mindset and the belief that we have can kind of trickle down into ways of coping, behavioral responses to setbacks and challenges and failures, right? So if I believe that my intelligence is fixed, I either have it or I don't. When I score poorly on a test, what does that mean? It means I don't have it, right? And what does that what do I do about that? If I don't have it, there's no point in putting effort in and then trying and working toward something that can't be changed. And when students have that sort of mentality, then they disengage. I mean, it's sort of an intuitive kind of response. Like, if I don't have it, I can't work on it, I can't change it, there's no reason for me to continue to pursue it and have put in effort. Compared to if a student has what's called a growth mindset, when I hit a setback or a challenge or a poor grade, my response is to say, okay, I probably didn't master it. I didn't do, maybe I can study a different way. Maybe I need to focus on the material in a slightly different way, using effort and different strategies to approach that failure and to work hard at it. And when you have that kind of competence belief, what the literature has shown over and over again is that students will engage rather than disengage when they experience failures and setbacks. Okay, so that's one thing that we've studied in my lab, and many others have studied, that tries to help us understand how do students cope with challenges and setbacks that make them, that promote academic achievement. Related to that, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, but related to this idea of competence beliefs is also the concept of imposterism. So I feel like I know we don't have a lot of time, so I don't even want to ask you guys to raise hands, etc. But I think many people have heard of imposterism. It's become kind of this pop term that people have used. I will remember that when I started graduate school, Carol Dweck asked me in one of our first meetings, what do you want to study? What do you want to do? What are you interested in? And the only thing that came to mind, because I wasn't expecting her to ask me that question, I was expecting her to tell me what to do. The only thing that came to mind was, I don't feel like I belong here. Like, I don't, yeah, I've been successful at a smaller school, not an Ivy League institution. And yeah, I've, done some things that might be maybe okay, but it didn't feel like I deserved to be there. Like I was smart enough to be there. Like, I belonged in that space. And so we started talking about imposterism. Imposterism has a sort of long history, mostly in clinical psych, where the researchers that started studying it were noticing that particularly women who were highly successful in their fields would come into a clinician's office and say, I'm having like incredible anxiety. I am in this top position. I don't think my successes are worth it. I don't think I can continue to be successful. People are going to find out that I don't know what I'm talking about. All of these beliefs sort of, motivated a sense of anxiety around academic performance and persistence. And I know that this is being recorded, but I will share this story anyway. I studied imposterism with Carol, and we worked on it quite a bit in graduate school. And I think it really clicked for me that this is something that many of us feel, not just me. When Carol was at a conference, and Carol Dweck is like the, developmental psychologist who has studied this work and created, a whole field of work around competence beliefs. Carol called me up one night and said she was at a conference with, I think it was developmental psychologists, or it may have been some other discipline. And she said she's at this conference, and just before she was about to get up and talk, she had this wave of imposterism kind of wash over her, where she was feeling like people are going to recognize that, like, maybe she doesn't know what she's talking about this specific field. Maybe she's not as much of a superstar as she is. So just recognizing that everyone, whether we objectively see their success as impeccable or not, can have these feelings of imposterism. So in studying imposterism, and I'm just going to put up a couple of slides. I obviously don't expect you to read it because the type is really small, but I just wanted to use it as a reminder to myself. Some of my students and I surveyed high-achieving undergraduate honor students at Stony Brook, and we measured their imposterism, again, which is their individual level variable. And what we found is that for these students who, again, objectively stellar, incredible students, they were reporting when they felt like imposters, they were reporting significantly higher levels of stress than their peers, lower efficacy and confidence in their ability to do the work that they were doing in their STEM field in particular, lower sense of belonging in the institution, and they were also thinking about dropping out and changing their major. Again, sort of related to the self-doubt that comes from imposterism. So this is one area where, again, my lab is really focused on this idea that even when, and particularly for graduate students who are coming in and they're highly successful, obviously they're getting into a great graduate program at Stony Brook, even for these students, getting into a program and being successful entering graduate school, many of them still feel this sense of imposterism. And what can we do to address and help them sort of think about these competence beliefs in a way that creates and instills greater confidence in them? Okay, so that's one example of an individual level variable, and we can certainly talk about what we do or what we can do to sort of address individual level variables. Social factors that we've studied in the lab include social support. The literature in psychology on stress and coping is a massive one, with some really deep research that clearly shows that the impact of a stressor depends on someone's resources that they believe are available to cope with it. So someone could be dealing with some incredible stressful event, but if they feel like they have support systems, financial support or financial means, whatever they need to be able to deal with that stressor, it'll feel less stressful than if I'm dealing with even a smaller stress, but I don't have the resources to manage it. So the literature has really talked quite a bit about how social support can be viewed as a resource, right? Feeling like you have a connection and a network that you can call on when you're in a challenging situation is an important external coping resource that students can use in different ways. So we've studied social support as one important mechanism in graduate and undergraduate education and support. One example of that is focusing on mentors as a form of social support. Some of my students several years ago surveyed undergraduate students at Stony Brook using a longitudinal design. And we were interested in thinking about what's the benefit of having a constant mentor. So when you're transitioning into college, do you have a mentor at the beginning of that transition, like in September, October? Do you have that same mentor over the course of a year? So do you have a constant source of support for you academically? Compared to some students who may start out with no mentor and gain one late, or have a mentor and then lose a mentor. We just really wanted to understand, like, what's the impact of having access to support? And what we found for those undergraduate students is that, as we would expect, having an advisor who is a consistent part of your transition to college predicted higher academic efficacy for students, so they felt more confident in their ability to deal with the challenges that they encountered, and also predicted greater sense of belonging. So having a mentor and having a consistent mentor, really important for student success. We also studied mentor support among graduate students in one of our AGAP research studies with the Center for Inclusive Education. We measured and asked students, graduate students, about their advisor, how supportive their advisor was, how helpful their advisor was. And then we measured things that, again, we know are important for things like STEM identity and belonging for success. So what we found there is that when students, and particularly so for underrepresented students, reported having a supportive and helpful advisor, then those students were more felt a stronger identity with their career field and felt stronger sense of belonging with their field as well. So again, that perception of support and mentorship is critical. Really quickly, I just want to tell you about this cute little study. Again, sort of developmental. This also says that having and being exposed to mentors that reflect your identity, and this is not to say that mentors that reflect your identity are better, but just that exposure to diversity of success allows students to sort of internalize that success. So many years ago, these researchers had middle school students draw what they thought of when they thought of a scientist, just a scientist, and this is what they drew, like, you know, male, balding, glasses, pocket protector, all of those great things. And this, they included thousands of students, nearly every student drew something along this lines. These researchers then exposed the students to one female scientist and had that scientist sort of, you know, talk about her experience, her career, etc. And then sometime later, they asked them to draw what they thought of as a scientist. And the students drew something like this. So just that exposure and feeling a sense of representation and connection in your field can broaden a sense of identity and career identity among students. And these are middle school students. We tried to do a similar kind of thing with college students. We gave college students, women, narratives of different, very diverse profiles of STEM role models, and looked to see how students who were exposed to those female STEM role models, what did that do in terms of their sense of belonging, their interest in career fields? And we saw that, again, just that exposure and representation increases students' sense of belonging and interest in a career field. So diversity and exposure, I think, is also, in terms of mentorship, is also really important. Okay, and then thinking about institutional messages. Again, this is probably quite intuitive. When environments are not very welcoming and don't convey that you belong and that your competence is valued and your contributions are valued, then those environments don't create and support connection and identity and efficacy among its scholars and students. There's lots of research to suggest that this may be the case. I know that we're running out of time, so let me just point to this research on competence beliefs. So that growth and fixed mindset research that Carol Dweck and her colleagues have done was all about the individual, like what my belief is and how that motivates me to cope. We've also done some work where we measure students' perceptions of what kind of environment, competence environment, are you in your department and in your space, right? So do the people around you in your environment value a fixed ability, or do they value a growth sort of mindset? And so we measure what we call perceived environment entity theory, which says some environments, again, some faculty, advisors, and mentors really value students who they view as having innate natural fixed ability, and may not value as much those who may seem to just, you know, work hard or be persistent or have sort of a different sort of valuing of different spaces. Elizabeth Canning did a really great study where she measured whether or not faculty had a fixed or growth mindset in their classes. And then she looked to see the impact of those different mindsets on student performance. And what she found is that when faculty have a growth mindset, students performed very well in their classes. There was an opportunity to sort of take a failure and move from that failure and grow from it, and not really a big difference between the performance of white and Asian students and underrepresented students. It looks big, but it's not that significantly different. But when faculty had a fixed mindset, a fixed mindset view of intelligence, both the sets of students' performance was lower than if faculty had a growth mindset, and particularly those for the underrepresented students. So there's some way that these different kinds of beliefs and valuing of intellectual ability may be conveyed, right, by how faculty talk about what it means to be successful, how to become successful, or how they structure their labs or how they structure their exams, et cetera, that we want to really think about. And this was another article by Sarah Leslie and Andre Simpian. Andre was here a few years ago at Stony Brook to talk about this work. They asked a national sample of faculty across different disciplines what their mindset beliefs were, and they mapped that out in relation to, so higher numbers here reflect a more fixed view of intellectual ability. And they map the percentage of US PhDs who are female in those disciplines. So this is basically suggesting that when disciplines have a very fixed and rigid view of what success and intelligence is, the representation and the diversity in those disciplines is also significantly lower than in other disciplines. So again, thinking about, what does that, how do you translate that theory of competence beliefs to, there may be some really concrete actions that may be happening that make certain students feel like they don't belong, they don't fit, and they're not valued in these spaces. And then finally, at Stony Brook, we also explore this idea of how students thought or perceived, graduate students perceived their departments. So we asked them about their perceptions of a fixed mindset within their departments. And we found that when students perceived that their departments were higher in valuing fixed mindset, particularly for women graduate students, they also reported greater perceived departmental sexism. They reported increasing feelings of imposterism, lower academic confidence and belonging over time, and considering dropping out of their grad programs. So this study kind of combines a lot of the individual, institutional, and social factors that we study in our lab. Okay, so really quickly, just to sort of go back to this idea, one of the things that I just want to highlight is that I've been talking about these different snapshots. The benefit of that for me, of talking about and looking at these different factors individually, is to say that if we want to intervene, we've shown that intervening on one of these things can be helpful. So we don't have to do everything all at once and try to create some complicated system and model and change, right? We can think about how to boost students' confidence in their confidence or lower feelings of imposterism, and that may be helpful for belonging and identity. We could think about changing institutional messages, and that may be helpful for some of these other factors. So there's a benefit, I think, to kind of thinking of these things as many different pathways that may lead to positive outcome for students over time. Okay, and I'm going to stop here and say, I stick this last slide up here, navigating the barriers and crossing the bridges to academic success. These are ideas or thoughts that, our lab has kind of put together over time thinking about this work. But I certainly think that the conversation and all of the expertise that's in this room will probably generate more ideas of how we can address any of these issues. Maybe I'll leave this up here so we can think about that. So thank you so much. I'll stop there and happy to talk and chat.
Amazing. Thank you, Bonita, so much. That was really great. I learned so many things. It's very fun. So we are going to open up to questions. I think everyone was listening very intently. I know I was. So I didn't see much come through the chat. I do have one question that was submitted actually via the RSVP. So maybe we'll start with that one and give everyone just a moment to collect their thoughts. And I think to Bonita's point, if you want to jump in and do more of a discussion, we welcome that in this space for sure. So the question that came in early on was, what are ways that to build more of this sense of community among students. And so I think that, we've illuminated those, but maybe, what has your team maybe encountered as the lowest hanging fruit in terms of that? Like, what are things that are maybe easiest to implement, or that have made, you heard a story that made a difference that maybe you could highlight for our friends here today?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think one of the things that seems sort of easiest to think about is allowing students to build connections organically in a way. So for example, in our psych department, a few years ago, some of the students got together and said, there are these handbooks in social psychology that have tons of chapters on different concepts. And the students decided that they were going to get together and read a chapter of the handbook in a low intense environment. They were going to bring their lunch and hang out in a room together. And every week they would sort of, read a chapter and talk about it without faculty or without advisors present, so that they could sort of just connect with each other, ask whatever questions they wanted to ask, and have that space. So I think to some extent, if we're thinking about departments creating structures, if there are opportunities and spaces to allow students to generate their own organic ideas of how to connect, but we provide the support for that, let's buy them lunch, let's create spaces where they can go and have their connections without them feeling like it's an evaluative space in a way. I think that's I've seen that work very well in different settings. So, but I'm happy to hear other thoughts from this group. I know that there have been many programs across departments that have done similar or done different things to create a sense of community and connection.
I'll just share, I know that one of the examples you had on a slide was of sort of pictures, or how different things about history, right, who historically has been in a space, can sort of seem like we're honoring history, but maybe also sends an impression about what we hope the future will look like, and that could be different. So I know that there were some choices made in the graduate school here at Stony Brook to honor history in a different way, that perhaps also made spaces more inclusive by changing how we, displaying art instead of sort of pictures that mostly represented older white men, and actually none of those positions are held by that particular set of demographics anymore. And so that is one way I know we've done it.
Yeah.
Are there any other examples that people want to share of ways that maybe you've already started some of this work? All right. On behalf of Celia, she had a question about the idea of fixed mindset and growth mindset. And what are some of the ways perhaps to help faculty understand the importance or the impact of their belief about fixed mindset or growth mindset? Has, does showing them the research seem to help, or what conversations maybe have been most productive about sort of reinforcing that idea and its impact?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have definitely found that having conversations with faculty where we share the research and what the research sort of shows, particularly when that research is of their own students, like in their own institution, that can be kind of easy to move folks, where it's not some abstract concept, but rather they can kind of envision that, yeah, these are my students saying and talking about what the impact is on them of, how I structure my course or how I structure my lab. So that to me, personalizing it a little bit has been really helpful in a way. And then I think, there's been some newer work where some researchers have tried to kind of catalog what behaviors correspond to growth or fixed mindset. And to me, that's really interesting, because there are things that, you know, maybe we do in our classes that we don't connect to conveying a growth or fixed mindset. And so if we have that kind of taxonomy to say like, oh, you know, not having an option where a student can resubmit something and show some additional work to demonstrate that they are engaging, you know, this topic, like that conveys to students that it's one and done, like you know it or you don't, and there's no opportunity for you to demonstrate something else, right? So I think for me, education and kind of sharing this work and the broader work for faculty, that seems to be helpful in getting people to think about how some things that they may take for granted or not think about its connection to conveying a message may actually be conveying a message to students, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep, I see Carrie's message.
Okay.
Yes, Carrie, that there's I think 2 articles that I've seen recently that talk about that cataloging of behaviors, in particular like in classroom settings. What are some of the policies that we often enact that kind of create that growth mindset, that fixed or growth mindset? So I'll definitely share that.
Excellent. Any other questions? I have another if no one raises their hand, but I'm bad at waiting, so I try and count to 10 in my head. So another, oh, great. Thanks, Karen. Is it ever too late to develop a growth mindset?
Definitely not. I think it's a challenge for sure to undo our typical habits. So I would draw on like my other social psychologists who study habits and like how to break habits. But I feel like growth mindset or fixed mindset is kind of a habit, right? Like something happens, you have a setback, and like you kind of fall into that way of thinking that you've practiced and rehearsed like all of your life. So I think it's just a matter of rehearsing a new strategy or a new approach and thinking about the evidence of it. You know, again, maybe because we're academics, I feel like educating people about, you know, why, and this is how Carol Dweck and some of her colleagues teach about growth mindset to younger children as well. Like they educate people on how the brain actually works, right? Like the brain actually develops faster and more nuanced connections when you learn and practice something rather than like you see it once and then you never go back to it again. So I feel like a process of education and practicing, you know, a growth mindset approach to thinking about things helps us change. I'll also say that I think, you know, changing the environments and, you know, what those institutional messages are that value a fix versus a growth mindset is also probably necessary for us to kind of really change the way that we think, right? So if I have a growth mindset, but I'm in a system where everyone around me values a fixed mindset, it's hard to let go of that, right? So I think some institutional change is also probably necessary to get folks to really like endorse and feel comfortable in that growth mindset.
So my last question is actually about our third area of consideration. So I'll go ahead and ask that. So you talked a little bit about students who are in crisis and how sort of having a mentor is one of the key ways to build social support. One question is sometimes students don't realize they don't have social support until they already sort of need it, right? And so are there any sort of indications about good, you know, how do you convey information about resources, right? When someone already needs a resource, sometimes that's not as helpful, which I'm assuming is why having a mentor is great, but
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I guess I would say, and you know, the space that I operate in is not necessarily at the high level that you all are operating in the grad school. But I guess I would say, drawing on all of your experiences, and anticipating a little bit of where some of the pitfalls typically may happen, or where some of the challenges may happen for students, front loading that education during the transition is really probably key, right? So front loading and repeating. So telling students when they come in, here are all the resources, and then repeating that, at different stages. Generally, someone will see it when they need it, probably, and be able to utilize it. I do feel like one of the things that we study a lot in my lab, and is a big part of the social literature, is that transitions are, a very key moment for doing a lot of this work. As students are coming into a new environment, some of their sort of previous ways of thinking comes with them, for sure, these competence beliefs and imposterism. But they're also trying to figure out what this space is, and what's good or bad about this space. And so that's an opportunity for you to, kind of create an environment, or help them create an environment that's supportive, and that conveys a supportive message to them kind of early on. So that transition period, I think, is a critical period for creating and putting some supports in place, so that they know where to come to, and who to come to, and what might be available, etc.
Yeah, I really liked what you said in there about repetition. I think sometimes we feel like we've checked the box of informing a student about a resource. And so it feels like, are we badgering them almost with this resource they don't need? But I think that reminder that you don't know you need a resource sometimes until you actually need it is a really good one. And for most of our graduate students, every year is a transition, right? Like school is a developmental process overall. And so that idea that they're transitioning basically constantly is helpful, I think, too. So, all right, well, we are at the top of the hour. So I just want to do a final call for any questions that are lingering. I am going to do my internal count. All right, great. Well, just once again, thank you, Bonita, so much. I think we all really valued everything you shared today, and thank you for the personal anecdotes as well as the rigorous research that you showed us today. I think it was a beautiful combination to help really understand some of these concepts and think about how we might apply them in our own work. So thank you so much for today, and thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks so much, everyone.